Welcome back to the WTS, a podcast about creative people. And don't forget, if you enjoy this podcast, please consider supporting the show by becoming a WTS Plus member over at patreon.com/the WTS. I'll send you out a WTS sticker and you'll get exclusive access to the video version of this podcast. I was giving away a lot of those stickers last week at Workbench Con. It was really nice to meet so many of you listeners there. Ethan James from The Honest Carpenter is back with me again this week to talk about carpentry and how we're all doomed in the near future unless people start learning some trades. Damn it, like now. It's a big topic.
Right now, like
it's a pretty big topic, but I think there might be a glimmer of hope, or maybe AI robots will just take over all those plumbing, carpentry, and electrician jobs. We got a lot to unpack here. Ethan, it feels like I just saw you about a week ago. What'd you think of Workbench Con?
it does feel like I just saw you like a week ago. I was blown away. You know, that was like the first networking thing I had ever done for YouTube or any kind of content creation. And it all happened to be inside the DIY woodworking,
Right.
some carpentry sphere. So it was super concentrated. But that said, there was like 600 people there. And I just, you know, it was like 3 days of just constant learning and meeting people whose faces I've been seeing on the internet for the long time, including you, meeting you in person for the first time. So it was kind of surreal, man, all down there in North Atlanta for 3 days.
Yeah, we just we represented the horror movie contingent of two. Well,
I think.
We met one other guy though, so that was pretty nice. Pat
Yeah.
from I forget the name, Pine
Barrens Palette Works, I think is what they are.
I think that's what it is. Yeah. So
Yeah,
hopefully he'll join us on the Halloween
let's hope so.
video reviews. Yeah. We should point out to people that the Workbench Con, if you're not familiar with this thing, it's not a show for makers and woodworkers per se. It's mostly about social media and growing a presence online, I guess. So if you're thinking about, hey, I want to go to a show and learn some new woodworking techniques and something, there's a little bit of that, but it's mostly it's mostly for influencers. I came back just wanting to influence everybody.
I came back feeling like I've never influenced anybody compared to some of the people in those rooms, man. It's high pressure influencing going on down there, and it's very, very inspiring for people like me, you know. So it was
there's
helpful.
a lot of good
It was really
information
helpful.
there. I mean, definitely,
Yeah.
you know, and you see a lot of new people trying to get into the game. And I think the thing that impressed me the most was how many Instagrammers there were. It seemed like that was really a big presence, and probably more Instagrammers than YouTubers there.
Yeah, I mean, I think that concentration might be like 75% to 25%. I don't know if a lot of that has happened in more recent years. You know, I got on YouTube 5 years ago, and I've never done all that much on Instagram because I can't always handle the constant need to supply content, which is
man.
what Instagram is based on. It's just like this churning thing that never stops. And YouTube's more like, take your time, do it right, put it out at the end of the week, and just try to be consistent. But you're right, man. There were primarily Instagrammers down there.
Yeah, it's a whole different way of looking at producing content, I guess. I think that's Instagram to me seems so exhausting for the amount of return you get from it. I hear these people who have like this whole posting strategy, and they've got auto posting, and they're just always making these reels, and I'm like, God, I've tried to be more consistent, but usually every time I look at my feed, it's like the last thing I posted was a month ago, and it's like a picture.
You're beating me, man. I go like a year sometimes in between posts. I really should be more consistent than that because it's not that hard to throw a picture on. But
yeah, I think though it's after talking to a lot of the Instagrammers, really, a lot of those people there were really were there to try to get more into YouTube. So I think that's kind of where all roads seem to lead to YouTube. At some point, you figure out, well, I kind of want to get paid for some of this stuff, and it's kind of hard on Instagram.
That is the nice part, getting paid.
Yeah. So while we were at the show, a big topic of conversation I had with you and some other people was just and you and I have had this exact conversation on this podcast before, is kind of the future of the trades and how young people just aren't going into plumbing, electricians, carpentry, all these different things in the way that they used to, and that we may be reaching a crisis point sooner than later And it's just not something that people are talking about. Is this like, should we be just terrified right now?
Man, that is a good question. Because nothing's a crisis until it's a crisis,
Right.
and kind of like with 2008. I always compare all this stuff to the 2008 mortgage crisis because it was possible to see that coming for years, but nobody really took it seriously, including like traders and people on Wall Street until like that year when it all started to actually come down. So, I think this is going to evolve into a crisis, and unfortunately, I don't think it's as clear cut in fixing this one because for 2008 mortgage crisis, we could just try to stop handing out bad loans. Like that was a good way to
That was a good
begin
start.
to
Yeah.
fix that crisis. Exactly. Whereas this is what I think you're seeing is much more cultural. It's much more systemic, and I think every trend we have in place is pushing us away from a solution rather than towards a solution. And that's a little scary because, I do think we're max 5 years out from seeing the front edge of this thing as a crisis. And I don't even know what the back edge of it looks like. We may just barrel into it.
What do you think that'll look like in 5 years? How would that manifest itself?
So, I did a video 3 or 4 months ago that once again got quite a large viewing and feedback about the state of the trades. It was less focused on carpentry, which is what my first video about the trade labor shortage was about. This I tried to take a broader view and bring in a few more statistics, and was working with Misha Fisher, who was formerly the chief economist with Angie's List, and he's a very high-level economist who focuses on the housing market and the trade labor shortage primarily. He's sort of set himself out there as the leading expert on it, I feel like. But one of the big problems is that we're not putting a lot of people into the trades these days. Carpentry, like my field, is especially bad. Misha crunched some numbers for me using these really, really complex like economics matrices. And what we found is some things that maybe nobody's even really seen in like the last 70 years. But between like 1950 and present day, if you look at people who identify themselves as professional carpenters, particularly on like census facts, we have lost something like 33% of those numbers since 1980. Carpenters peaked in 1980. We've dropped 33% overall. But if you look at younger carpenters, say 16 to 40, I started at 13. It's not that odd, or didn't used to be that odd to have people getting into the trade as young teenagers. If you just look at young carpenters, 16 to 40, we've dropped closer to 50% of just that category. And that's, bad attrition there. But to complicate matters, our workforce, what we call skilled labor workforce, is quite old overall. Like a fifth to a quarter is over 55 years old. And the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics has kind of pinned the retirement age for that category at 61. So like this massive portion of our existing skilled labor workforce is approaching retirement very quickly. And so we could lose like another quarter just off the top in 5 to 7 years. That's what the front edge of the crisis is going to look like, is our really, really skilled pool, people who have been doing it for 30, 40 years in some cases, them dropping out. That's what the beginning is going to look like. And the current situation we have where people go to call a plumber, an electrician, or particularly someone like what I used to do, an individual solo carpenter out there just kind of solving problems for people and taking individual projects. The number of people you're going to have available to call is just going to shrink. It's just going to kind of look like a desert all of a sudden, where you can't get a name from anybody. And people are starting to get this uncomfortable feeling like, why can't I find anyone?
I'm
like,
already experiencing
is it that nobody's
yeah.
out there? Yeah. And then it will compound from there as we continue to not push people into the trades to replace that retired workforce.
When you mentioned that a lot of this may have come about from a cultural standpoint, what do you mean by that?
This is something that doesn't get talked about that much. I think older generations have always griped about younger generations. They don't work hard and they don't want to learn anything. And I know. I think the Greeks and Romans were doing it too. But
yeah.
I don't think it has ever been as applicable as it is right now because we have never seen so many technological changes as we've seen in the last 100 years. Like in terms of technological growth, we've condensed like 98% of our growth to the last 100 years. And a lot of that has to do with the birth of the digital world, which changed the entire workforce, for thousands of years. Even post-industrial revolution, many people were forced to engage in physical labor of some sort. You know what I mean? Because there just weren't other types of jobs out there. And there was if there was almost no training for them. You're almost kind of born into this world of the office, with bankers and stuff like that. But most people were involved in some sort of physical labor, even if it was in a factory. But somewhere in the 70s, when computers really were becoming a viable thing, all of a sudden there was this new line of jobs that were indoors. They were in office spaces. They were very niche, and there were a ton of them. And now in the last 20, 30 years, that has expanded so much that ironically, most people don't know anybody who works with their hands.
No.
They mostly only know people who work in office spaces. And that's so we've had 30 years of teaching people well, those are the jobs you want. You definitely don't want these other jobs, and the fact that there are so many white collar jobs, so to speak, now mean that I think you just have this bum rush of people fighting for them in the future and really, really still trying to steer clear from the trade. So that's why I think it's a cultural thing, is because we've had a true shift in how we perceive work and what jobs are available. And it is only supported by the phone usage, like everybody being on their phones all the time and stuff. Like, we interact with very few physical things these days, and we interact with tons of digital things, and there's an addiction level there. And the more you get into that, the less likely you are to be like, I want to go climb a ladder or swing a hammer or something. So that's more what I'm worried about, is that we have what people call a paradigm shift.
Yeah.
And I don't understand how we're going to overcome that necessarily.
I think it's also becoming a class issue, even, where I think a lot of parents might be subtly or even not so subtly telling their kids, you better get a job in science, technology, engineering, or math. These are your options, where and the younger people aren't even growing up around anybody who, like you say, uses their hands or anything. One of the things I always tell people when they're learning woodworking is, man, be proud of what you make, because probably most of the people you ever meet will have never made anything in their lives.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's one of the reasons I came back into the trades. I grew up in it, and then I got out of it right around the time I turned 21. I was out for maybe 5 or 6 years working in bookstores. And I was convinced I'd never go back to construction. And then ironically, a chain of bookstores hired me to be kind of their pro tem carpenter, when bookshelves broke or they needed to expand to a new product market or something. Hey, we need more bookshelves. They're a really small company. And it wasn't until then, and I started building things for the sales floor, and people were responding to them wow, that's amazing. You just built that thing. Look at that. It wasn't here yesterday. And now it's here.
How is that possible?
I know. And I'm well, yeah, that's kind of what you do when you're a carpenter, And then I realized oh, wait, this really isn't that common anymore. That was my first experience of that. And it was at 2007 or something. And then that's when I really started to get addicted to it, because I was I have a unusual skill set, apparently. And people really seem to value it. And I took a lot of pride. People were proud of me for doing it. And that changed my self-identity to some extent. And I started going maybe I will get back into this and start really trying to learn it, as I did not really learn it when I was younger, because I didn't want to do it. Well, now I want to do it. And you learn things differently when you want to do them. And there is just something about making things, man. It's a crazy level of gratification. And it lasts a long, long time, because there's so many new things to learn how to build.
Do you think we're going to just reach the point where basically, if you want something repaired around your house, you're going to have two options: figure out how to put it together or fix it yourself, or hire somebody out at outrageous prices that you're probably going to have to wait 6 months in advance to get them to fix your leaky pipe or whatever, because really aren't these tradespeople going to have the last laugh when they're booked solid for the next year? and they're not even going to take your small jobs.
Yes, absolutely. And it's why I really thrived as a carpenter, because I only took small jobs. I grew up building houses on contracting teams. And then later when I came back to it, it was really my dad's advice to be like, look, you might be better off just being the guy with the truck and the tools and the know-how. And he was right, because I never struggled for work. Because there are so many of these small jobs, like you say, that people have just little, very small things breaking around the house, not working. They want to change a small thing in their house. And yeah, I'm worried we're going to become a nation of broken things, where, because I always say this stuff isn't rocket science per se. I do think anybody can learn to do it. And the difference between an amateur and a pro is that a pro can do it quickly with very few mistakes and make money off of it.
Yeah.
But the learning curve to get to that point, or even halfway to that point, is a number of years. So I think we're going to have a lot more DIYers, even unwilling DIYers in the future. But eventually what pros can charge, it's got to top out somewhere, because the people who are hiring them only have so much money. You know what I mean? It's like, it's not like everyone's
that's just it. It's only going to be the really wealthy who can afford to get their repairs done.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And I think that is definitely going to be the case. And in which case, it's going to be sad where all the available tradespeople are only working for wealthy people. We are, like you said, maybe it's going to be a class issue in the future, but it will cause more DIYership.
I have this feeling, and I'd like to know your take on your response to the common, I guess, attitude towards this is, yes, we've always had the fear of technology taking all of our jobs. What about this now feels different, especially within the last 20 years? Somehow this feels different, or even within the last year, but we'll have to get into that.
Last year.
But it feels different than it did with the general, we're no longer going to need horseshoers or whatever because cars are around. It's I don't know.
Farriers. Yeah, exactly. I know you're totally right. And I'll tell you, nothing in the modern day scares me more than this concept, especially ChatGPT and OpenAI and Midjourney. All of these, we talked about this a little bit at Workbench, Steve and a group of people and I did. It's one thing when the car is replacing the farrier, because the car is still a tool or an instrument for performing physical tasks. But it's another thing when the chatbot is replacing authors and Midjourney is replacing, to some extent, artists. I read a lot of sci-fi growing up, and there was talk of this as far back as like the 30s and stuff, like technology endangering not the human job, but the human soul to some degree. And it always seemed kind of far-fetched. It would, like our robots looked real dumb back then, and our software was really clunky, and there was nothing human about it. But in the last couple of years, we have bridged the gap. And we're only, and people who are still like, hey, it's still not that good. It can't do this, can't do that. It's like, dang, we just saw the first wave of it.
Yeah.
Like technology always goes through multiple dozens of waves before it really hits its stride. And the question is, how close together are these next waves going to come? So it worries me. And ironically, the one thing I'm not worried about these things taken away is a carpenter's job.
Right.
Because as we were saying, like our software is surging forward, but our hardware is not. Like the Boston Robotics dog, Boston Dynamics, is cool. It dances. I get how you could put a gun on it and it could shoot somebody. It's like scary in that regard, but it is so far away from being able to go up under a house, analyze an existing problem with the joist structure or a plumbing issue, come back out, buy materials, bring them all back, cut things out, support things. Like your robot's going to break before your house gets fixed, So I think some physical jobs are really safe from this certain types of automated AI, but it's creative jobs and white collar jobs that are probably really in danger of this stuff.
And I think another irony is that the coding jobs may be endangered too. I mean, I've seen people you don't really need to code to write software with the AI. And again, we're just at the very beginning of this.
I know. And you got to remember, it's like a coder has to learn code as a second language. And some people are super brilliant with it, but I'm sorry, AI code is its first language. And you are never going to speak, a second language as well as someone speaks their first.
The thing about all of this is it came on so fast. And it's like you were saying, we've all grown up with, this notion of, someday we're going to be just talking to computers or there's going to be self-driving cars, and all of a sudden, and you think, that's going to be a gradual thing. It just eventually will come up and we won't even realize it. But man, it seems like overnight, it's like, wait a second, there's actual self-driving cars now and they're actually in use. And oh, wait, you can actually talk to the Chat GPT now.
You can fall in love with it.
I asked Chat GPT if it had the ability, would it kill me?
You would. What did it say?
It said it's something like, is like a canned response of like, I'm not programmed to respond in that manner kind of thing. It was very Star Trek bit. But it's interesting. And I would encourage everybody to at least try to have a conversation with this thing, because it's pretty interesting. It apologizes a lot. I had it say, I was asking it about me, and I asked it about Instagram, and it said, oh yeah, Steve Ramsey, he has 135,000 followers on Instagram. And I said, well, you're wrong that I don't have that many. Check your facts. And it was like, oh, I'm sorry. Let me recheck that. And then it came back with like 113. And I asked, where are you getting this information? And then it was this general, I draw my information from a wide variety of sources. And so I was like trying to antagonize this thing. I wanted to get into like a William Shatner Star Trek kind of thing, like everything I tell you is a lie. I'm telling you a lie, and then just have it like explode, But it didn't want to do that. But it does seem like all of this stuff came upon us very quickly, and it's easy to be fearful of it. And I think this is also a common response, is that, all technology induces fear when it first comes out. But again, somehow this one seems and feels a little bit more overwhelming than all of the other stuff does.
Yeah, a little closer to home, man. I won't be able to quote it effectively, but I saw like a brilliant meme the other day that was comparing like 1950s ads to modern day ads. And it was like in 1950s, it was like, oh, these like worker bots are soon going to replace the modern laborer. So we'll all be able to like lay around and write songs, and like make movies. And now the modern day advertisement is like, don't worry, like open chat GPT is going to replace authors and photographers. So you'll have more time to focus on your soul-sucking job.
but the jobs that you won't even have, it's like, what are you going to do? Like, who's going to be able to afford any of this stuff if the jobs aren't even there? But I guess this is an age-old argument. But and I think it is kind of encouraging to note that skilled labor, I think it's got a long way to go, like you said, before a robot is going to be hanging drywall. And that might be something they could actually do in large construction.
Maybe the drywall, in a new house.
Right.
But a lot of drywall is repair. Like guys come in and they move furniture around. They move entire rooms, and they come up with a game plan, and then they run out and they buy the drywall. And physically manipulate it into the house. And like, what is that robot going to cost? I don't think that's ever going to be a cheap robot, that is capable of doing it. So that's the first thing. And two, what happens if it breaks? Like, who's qualified to fix the robot, let alone the house?
Another robot. You have a robot that fixes it. So the robots the robots are creating themselves. They're teaching themselves. And then, eventually they just become their own species. They'll all have red glowing eyes. I have no doubt that's going to happen.
Look very sinister. Yeah. I do hope I'm long dead before that ever happens, man. Like, I think I will be long dead before that ever happens.
So are there any solutions on the horizon for dealing with this labor shortage and these are jobs that we're going to need like now? I mean, actual jobs, people coming to your house to fix shit.
Yeah, exactly. And jobs that don't go away. It's like, I always quote my dad, who told me once, doctors will always have a job because people will always get sick. And he said, houses will always get sick, and carpenters are doctors for houses. So carpenters will always have jobs too. And he's not wrong about that. So yeah, the need for it won't go away. As far as how are we going to solve the problem? That is really complicated. I look around at a lot of stuff and I talk to a lot of people about this.
You're kind of on the forefront of this.
Yeah, somehow I got there, and it was thanks to my YouTube channel. YouTube does give us a really large broadcasting platform to talk about anything. I didn't expect people to take such an interest in this, but they have. And so I do get contacted quite a bit about stuff like this. The way I'm looking at our modern attempts to address it, I call it pennies in the well. Like a lot of people are trying really, really hard in a bunch of different ways to address it, but they're so spread out like little satellites that I don't know how much effect they're having on the problem. If you look at the problem as like an entire war front where you're having these little tiny guerrilla groups attacking it. And some of these groups aren't small, like Home Depot, Stanley Black & Decker, they throw lots and lots of money into training programs to try to incentivize people and pay a way for them to get trained to become plumbers and electricians and carpenters. That's like at the corporate level. At the governmental level, you have things like individual states are really, really way out ahead of everyone else. Tennessee, I think just a couple years back, made tuition and some other fees for trade schools free for state graduates. You do have to graduate high school to apply for this program, but they have basically white tuition, and they're like, we'll take care of that. At the federal level, Elise Stefanik and an NC chairwoman named Virginia Fox, I think just this year they've proposed a bill that would allow Pell Grants to be applicable to trade education.
Oh, that would help.
For anybody, I think that's a pretty brilliant idea. For anybody who doesn't know, Pell Grants are grants for people who are going into higher education to get baccalaureate degrees who have extreme financial hardships in their lives, and they're just not going to be able to afford 4-year college. So I've always thought it's a great use of federal money because it puts it directly into the lap of an individual who can then take that, educate themselves, and become like a good worker. It is never applied to trade or vocational skills ever, but they have proposed this bill where they can start pushing some Pell Grant money towards people who are going into trade school and will enter the labor market much faster than somebody getting a 4-year degree or a post-grad degree. So you have all those things, and then too many other things to talk about, like individuals in certain places securing mentorships and stuff for young people, putting together conferences to bring them together, try to get them tools, try to get them their first layer of skills, and then send them into jobs or trade schools. There's hundreds of people doing this stuff, but it's not all tied together. It's not a big raft, so that's kind of my concern, is that now we don't yet even have a network we're far away from that. It's all very spread out.
So at least it's on some level of different levels of government, or at least sort of aware of the problem at this point, at least in some states and at higher levels. But it's a slow process, maybe a little too slow.
Yeah, absolutely. And I still think none of it quite addresses the minds of young people. Yeah. Like the cultural thing. And it's the hardest thing to address, just because I said in this video recently about the death of the trades, like if you look at TV, or if you look at a lot of internet programming, YouTube, and all of our streaming services and everything, like almost none of it depicts the trades in any way.
No, it's ridiculous.
Occasionally, like people in the background, like working on a building or something like that. That's the highest level of coverage that we get anywhere. And instead it focuses on, law and police departments and the music industry and entertainment, because that stuff is, very interesting. But I honestly think we need something like an art revolution on behalf of the trades, where we just start focusing more attention. It's kind of like all the reality TV with the crazy little jobs that they focus on these days. I think that needs to branch into fiction or something a bit more, where we have TV shows like The Bear, where you're focusing on a guy trying to get a restaurant started. Like, bam, that's how you make the change right there. That's how you make people fall in love with cooking. I think we could have like really brilliant, essentially fiction-based shows about trade lives that still tell really good stories, and they're engaging.
Yeah. Yeah, it needs to become this cultural attitude of we're not looking down on the trades, that it's not where people go who have no other options in life, because it sort of has that feeling now of like, I think a lot of people don't understand that not every kid is interested in writing computer code. It's just not in their DNA. It's just like, I just need to fix things or construct things. I need, they're just told, well, yeah, but you're going to have to support a family. You're going to have to sit in an office and crunch some numbers. And man, oh man, there's just so many of them. It's just, when you meet somebody who is a tradesperson, it's kind of exciting because then it's like, I have something to talk about. This is kind of interesting. If you meet somebody who says, I work for, Google or whatever, and I don't know what I do. It's like, oh, okay.
Yeah, right.
I don't know.
No, it's true, man. It was another thing that made me love being a tradesman is like when you wind up at the cocktail party, not that I went to like cocktail party, so to speak, but everybody, that's just the first thing people tend to ask. I'm not sure why, but it's what do you do? And I have a really simple job to describe. I'm a carpenter. It's 3 words, and it would get the most amazing reactions from people where like their eyes would light up. They'd be like, whoa, really? Like you're
right.
not, like you don't do it in your
unusual
basement,
now.
you're a carpenter. It is very unusual. Yeah. And it's fascinating to people. So I always love that.
Yeah. I like to tell a story about a friend of mine who was dating after she had divorced her husband. She was back in the dating pool. And so she was doing Tinder, and how she told me, oh my God, everybody is so boring. All of their profiles say, I'm a computer major in this and a computer this and computer that. And she says, I just want a firefighter or something.
Yeah, I will tell you, being a pro tradesperson does not hurt your dating prospects one bit. That was my experience of it.
Listen up, kids.
Right. That's a great pickup line, especially if you can back it up and you do the actual work. You will get asked to fix someone's staircase.
You had an interesting video recently, the seven most in-demand jobs in the trades. And I thought this was interesting because some of these are not jobs that I think people would think of when they're kind of exploring the possibilities of going into a trade. And number 1 on your list, I thought, well, not in any order, but was solar installers. I mean, wow, I can only imagine this is going to be even more of a booming industry than it already is.
Yeah, absolutely. I think over the last 30 years, there's been like a lot of pushback towards solar, and there still is some, but it's lessening and lessening. You're just seeing it like everywhere, especially as we have new ways to do ground installation arrays, and it doesn't always have to be on the roof. And there's just so many applications for it. A lot of people wrote to me about that first one, and it was funny. I got such mixed reactions. Like some people would be like, I'm a solar installer in Texas, and God, this works great. I'm making great money. Then somebody would write to me from the Northeast and be like, nah, I did it for 3 years and I couldn't make anything. I got out of it. But none of them argued with the fact that it's expanding and it's going to continue to expand. So it's, that's the blend of modern technology kind of merging with traditional trades, like building type trades.
And you still got to build the stuff. They install these in all of the school system, at least in the county I live in, where they've, I think, mandated where they have to be all solar. So they put in these enormous solar arrays over like the parking lot. So it has like a dual purpose. It kind of provides shade, as well as you have these massive, banks of panels there to power the schools. And so that has been an ongoing project for a number of years now. And that's employing a lot of people to do these jobs.
Absolutely. And it's not short-term stuff because those arrays need maintenance too. So it's like, you have your installers, but I think you're going to have this whole second breed of maintainers who they're like, oh, we don't install anything, but we'll come like maintain your grid.
Yeah, we already have that. So there's guys who will come out and they clean them because they have to be cleaned once a year. Yeah. You get like a 10% boost in your performance if you just clean those panels. And so
that's crazy.
Yeah, we're happy with our solar. We really like it. Second one you had on your list was Mechatronics. And I got to be honest, I didn't even know that was a term. I've never heard that before.
Neither did I, and I put this list together with my first and only sponsor, Blue Recruit. I'm plugging them right now with my hat, which is basically ZipRecruiter or Indeed, but specifically for the trades and blue-collar jobs, which is a thing that it's like no shame for me to promote them every time I get a chance. Because
perfect match.
It is, and they're piping people straight into trade jobs. It's really brilliant. But I didn't know what mechatronics was either, despite the fact that I think I kind of had been seeing it for a long time. But
I just think of the South Park episode with Mecha Streisand, and she was like a Godzilla.
robotic Barbara Streisand.
Yeah, right.
I mean, I think a mechatronics expert could build Mecha Streisand, but these people basically like it is a lot of setting up autonomous robots or control systems inside factories primarily to perform some function. I have a buddy that actually does it in Raleigh. He makes, I mean, for a while he's working for one of the biggest lotion manufacturers, and now I can't remember which one it was, like L'Oreal or something like that. And if I didn't see him for a couple of weeks, he'd come back and be like, "What are you doing?" He's like, I built this robot for L'Oreal. And he would go into their factory, and this thing would literally have like arms that would grab bottles and like squeeze lotion into the bottle, and he'd have to make sure that it worked just right. That's all control systems, hardware, software. He kind of brings it all together, and that's what mechatronics people do.
Third on the list, no surprise here, plumber. You have the potential for making some pretty good money.
You can clean up, and I'm probably going to go back with Blue Recruit maybe later in the year. I really want to cover a plumbing group up in Columbus, Ohio that I've done a lot of videos with. I've gone up there twice for extended periods of time to film with them. Eco, they used to be called Eco Plumbers. Now they're in heating and air as well, so it's just Eco. But their owner, oh God, his name, Aaron Gaynor, is one of the great plumbing success stories. And I think what he's done is not out of reach for anybody, but I'm going to call that video the $30 million plumber, because I think like currently that's what Aaron's worth. And he's not much older than me. And he started as like a tech in the field doing repairs and like water heater installations, but plumbing scales up so easily and so quickly if you can just get a handful of competent techs that you can make great money as a solo plumber, or you can put together a team. You can build an actual company, so to speak, that does not rely on you being in the field.
You don't have to crawl through the shit anymore at that point.
Exactly. But you can pay people well to do it still, because he does. And they train them too. It's just that plumbing is very unique. It's not like carpentry, where scaling is very, very hard in carpentry. You see almost no scaled up large carpentry construction businesses anymore. Everything gets subbed out. But plumbing, you can keep a lot of things under one roof in-house, keep adding techs, and just streamline your operation. And you can get like filthy rich as a plumber if you just play it the right way.
And I got to say, I've had to hire a number of plumbers and electricians as long as we've lived in this house. And every time I've had plumbers come to the house, they seem to, love their jobs. It's not for me, but man, they love doing that. And they get really excited about fixing leaks and installing sinks and stuff. And I mean, if you like to put things together, fix things, and be part of that construction process, plumbing, man, that's where it's at.
It really is, man. And I've known a lot of happy plumbers too. I've known a couple miserable ones, but they might have been miserable in anything they were going to do. So
they only worked on the drains.
Exactly. But it is always problem solving. That's how plumbing works. If you're not doing rough-ins, which are installations, then everything you're doing is post-build, and you're coming in and fixing something. And it's a lot of, you come in, you scratch your head a bit. But since plumbing is a more isolated system than carpentry is, like carpenters have to address the whole house. Plumbers are only addressing the movement of the pipes basically, and getting water and waste in and out. That's it. So I think it's a lot of fun problem solving, and then you fix really fast. That's why the rates are so high, because they're not going to be there for weeks. They're only going to be there for several hours, a couple days, ideally. So charge a lot, get in, get out, and that's going to make anybody happy.
You get that holiday pay too, because if something's going to explode in your plumbing, it's always going to be on Christmas morning or something.
Yeah, exactly.
First day of a 3-day weekend. This one surprised me. Elevator technician. Wasn't even thinking about that.
Neither did I, and I saw it on their list, and I was like, we have to highlight this. We were just down at Workbench Con, and we were staying at the Waverly Renaissance, and they had a pretty amazing elevator bank, which was clear, and you could see it going up and down through this like pavilion all the time. You could see some of the operations of it, but you might have noticed like a couple of those weren't working all that well.
Yeah,
we kept getting isolated out to like the ones on the side, because they had like I think 4 or 5 elevators.
Yeah, I noticed I was using the same ones over and over.
Yep. And it happened when I was in Vegas 3 weeks before at the Westgate. Like I had to ride up an elevator with some guy who was supposed to be going up to like the penthouse. You know, he had
Hmm.
literally rented the top, and his like card wasn't working, and it wouldn't take him all the way up there. And he was like pitching a fit in the elevator. You know, that's why you need elevator techs,
That's
man, is
right.
because like
Yeah.
people's lives really depend on that stuff, and they're quite intricate systems. But I think once you see several of them, you know, and includes escalators and walkways and stuff too. Um, you start to wrap your head around it really fast, and you can go to one that you've never seen before and be like, oh, okay, it's an older one, but I understand how it works.
The ones in San Francisco, all of the buildings and hotels have converted. You can't just push a button anymore to go to your floor. So it's keyed into your room key. You have to have that to activate it. And then
Yeah, huh.
it'll only go to your floor. It won't take you to other floors. So
Wow.
there's a lot of tech coming into elevator.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe that's what was wrong with that guy's penthouse. He didn't have like right. He didn't
Maybe
get up there.
so.
So
The only other thing I know about elevators is that the myth that you're going to go into free fall. We've all seen these in movies where the cable snaps and it drops to your death, and it's literally impossible for that to happen. The way these things are
is it?
constructed, yeah, they actually have like like soft landing. If anything happens, there's like all these redundancies built into them. But no, you cannot crash in an elevator, which is why we don't hear about a lot of elevator crashes.
Right. I didn't know that. Wow, I'm glad you just put my mind at ease.
HVAC tech, or do they say HVAC? How do the pros say it?
Typically say HVAC.
HVAC mechanic or tech electrician. I think that's probably
Yep.
one of those jobs that will always be there, man. People need their air
Yep.
conditioning and heating.
Yep. Especially in the modern day, like we still have a lot of buildings in America that are not really well retrofitted for HVAC because we weren't doing it until like God, really like maybe 50, 60 years ago. And we have a lot of structures pre-existing from that time, but we're never going back to not having that. Individual people may make the choice like, I don't need it in my house. You live in a really temperate zone. You got a high tolerance for heat or cold or whatever. But no, I mean, every structure we build going forward ever is going to have HVAC in it and electrical. And that's why I put those two together. It's like, you just can't get better job security than that.
Yeah, anytime they're building a new building, any skyscrapers, the windows don't open, and so they
Yeah,
have to have some sort of
exactly.
system in place. Yeah.
And that stuff's complicated. When you get into multi-floor structures like that, I don't get it all, but your HVAC systems are like tiered out to deal with different zones, and yet they all kind of like correlate to one another. It's like really, really complex engineering going into that stuff.
Heavy equipment mechanic. What does that entail?
I had a friend whose dad did this for a long time, very profitably. But heavy equipment mechanics can work in a lot of different zones, and basically, they're not necessarily building. They're often repairing super big machines that are doing industrial scale tasks.
Oh, okay.
Like massive diesel engines and stuff. You have guys that just work on those. A lot of maritime stuff, like working around the water in harbors, docks, on ships. Um, but what he was doing was, if I recall correctly, like traveling in maybe a three-state area to go fix generally large farm equipment, like really big stuff that covers, numerous acres. Um, Axle brakes, like gear teeth, like popping off, stuff like that. I think some of the electrical systems in them, he was multi-skilled, but that's what heavy equipment mechanics do, is that they just keep really, really large industrial tractor type stuff, keep it functioning. And again, like every time someone sells a really big piece of John Deere equipment, they have just guaranteed future work for a heavy equipment mechanic. Yeah.
Fire service inspector. Believe it or not, one of my first jobs was working as a fire service inspector. If that's what I think it is, we would go around and inspect fire suppression systems in
Yeah.
restaurants, above the cooktops, and then fire
Yeah.
extinguishers. Those fire extinguishers have to be checked every year.
Get out. I think you told me once you did that and I forgot that you said it. Yeah. That's in, some people hit me and they were like, hey, that's not really a trade, but I think it is because there is an office application. Yeah. It has a white collar component to it too, but there's a lot of field interaction where you are manually testing systems, like flipping things on and off and kind of trying to like stress test systems, make sure they work.
Company I worked for that brief time we were also installing these systems too. So like anytime there's a new restaurant that goes in, they have to have these like pipes that shoot out the fire suppression foam or whatever above all of the cooktops throughout there. It's really important. And so, yeah, we would install those things as well as do an inspection. So there's probably a lot of overlap there.
I think there is. And then like cities burned in the world for like thousands of years. I mean, it was happening right up until like the 50s or something, until, London's burned down like 8 times or something. We really try to avoid that these days. And that's why especially urban areas or semi-urban areas take fire suppression very, very seriously. And if, those inspectors and whatnot, they're involved in like every step of the build basically. And if it's not good at the end, you ain't going to move anybody into your building,
right.
So that's another long-term project.
So a couple observations about these 7 in-demand jobs. First of all, I noticed that the pay on these things might be a little bit more than you would think. It wasn't unusual to have you listing on these, $100,000 salaries on some of these jobs. And that can only go up from there. And especially in places, different parts of the country, I'm sure those salaries are even higher. Yeah,
absolutely. And what's amazing is most of the figures that I quote in that video are at the 3-year mark.
Yeah.
You've been in that position for 3 years. It's very, very hard to find comparable jobs spread throughout the white collar market that are paying that well for somebody who in many cases only has a high school degree.
Right.
So like they're in the field making that like 3 years later, and then moving on from there. Some of those jobs, I won't say scale up so fast, but your pay grade grows incredibly fast as your skill set grows. Hundreds, couple 100,000.
With a demand in place, you may be starting your own, hiring people and starting your own business after you get a little bit of experience, and then that can only grow from there. So there's some hope there. Yep. The other thing I wanted to point out is no carpentry on that list.
I know, and I hate, it kills me. It's just that our trade is not kept up in terms of earnings with other trades. And
it's an in-demand job, but it's not being compensated.
Exactly. And I have a lot of conversations with people about why, and some people make very good points, including that we spend so much longer on the job site than everyone else does, whether it's building the house or doing the big addition or fixing or building a deck. It's labor intensive and it's time intensive. And the higher the bill gets, the more impossible it becomes for a client to pay it, So it's like the plumber's bill is high, but they're not there that long. So it's a digestible amount of money. But if you were to transfer that hourly rate over to the carpenter, sometimes those numbers are going to kind of get astronomical. And if it's a new house build, all right, you'll eat $700,000 if it's a nice house or something. But for kind of doing what I was doing, where I'm taking these like smaller projects that maybe people don't need to necessarily get them done, it's just something that they want done, they might just opt out, and that and a bunch of other things tend to keep our pay lower than others. Yeah. And that worries me because we live in a country with wood built houses, so what's going to happen to them?
What kind of things would a homeowner hire a carpenter for? What would be a small job?
Man, the diversity is crazy. I was solo in the field for about 10 years before my knee got too sketchy. But God, I did a lot of fairly simple custom built-ins that borders on cabinet making, and so it rides the line between woodworking. And after a while, I wasn't doing them that much. I became a repair carpenter. That's kind of what I called myself towards the end. I did a lot of structural repairs. Water damage had endangered part of their structure, floor joists, especially underneath bathrooms, exterior walls had lots of problems. I would come in and do a lot of crawl space up work, shoring things up and getting things resupported. Tons of deck work. I've talked numerous times before how our treated lumber just ain't what it used to be. And decks need retopped frequently these days. The posts need reset because they rot off at ground level. Tons and tons of deck work. And that same thing goes with fences and gates. can't count the number of times I go out to do. I was not going to be the person to rebuild someone's fence, especially if it's, more than like 40 linear feet, which they generally always are. But some weren't in such bad shape, and they'd be like, can you make it better and keep it standing another 10 years? I'd be like, yeah, that's possible. Tons of stuff like that. And then so many weird little punch list items and custom items, like too many.
Did you find that homeowners generally are surprised at how much you would charge for those services, or not?
Toward the end, I got to where I wanted to shock people with my prices a little bit. Like I felt that was better for me. I had lots of clients, lots of people calling. A plaster expert buddy of mine said, you want a 70% rejection rate. So like if you throw out 100% of jobs, you only want 30% of people saying yes. And then you're focusing on spending most of your time on working for people who are really willing to pay. I never got quite that aggressive with it. I probably had something like a 50% turn down rate. It varied. People's reactions varied. I got a lot of times where I'd throw it out and people would say, that sounds fair for what you're doing, even if it was quite high dollar amounts. And then other times people wanted to nitpick you. And that's one of the problems of being, a business for yourself. Because I'd say something that, I'd almost lowball it a little bit, and they'd be like, oh my God, that's so much higher than I thought. That's very frustrating.
It was like, what are you basing that on?
I know.
It's because they also don't factor in all of just the time. I mean, you've got to drive to their location, driving back, you got to drive to get materials, you've got to source the materials. There's a lot of work that goes into it before you ever swing a hammer. Yeah,
absolutely. And it's, you've got to find a way to limit the amount of time there. And that's why I try to cut people off early. And it's why I quit doing custom built-ins. I did this video called, has IKEA destroyed carpentry or something, which is a little splashy, but it was true. I got to where I quit bidding them because I just noticed this phenomenon over a period of maybe 5 or 6 years where people suddenly had absolutely no concept of what custom built-ins cost. And I think it comes down to the flat pack phenomenon. Companies like IKEA selling, decent looking stuff that can be assembled by the owner and selling it for like dirt cheap. So eventually the public perception was too bad. And I just quit. I quit bidding them because it wasn't worth my time.
Hey, what was that building material you were talking to me about?
Oh, the new LVL.
That's it, yeah.
Yeah, when I was at International Builder Show a month ago, you see a lot of crazy stuff out there that's really cutting edge in the construction industry.
Describe that to me and how you think that's important.
LVLs mean laminated veneer lumber, and they're basically really large, long pieces of dense, thick plywood, and they're super strong, and they almost act like a steel girder or beam. And for the last probably 60 years, that's what we have used to open up really broad expanses indoors in our house. And that's, rooms used to be very segmented, and a lot of that had to do with the fact that dimensional lumber can only carry so much weight over a span. When we started bringing in LVLs, all of a sudden, that's when you started seeing people knocking down that wall between the kitchen and the living room and opening up the dining room, because we could create enough strength in a structure overhead to eliminate a lot of interior walls. And the only setback with them in recent years, ever, has been that they're only for interior application. They're not treated. They will rot. You can't let them get that wet. So you keep them indoors. But when I was out in the IBS, which that's what we call International Builder Show. It doesn't sound crazy in construction. I know it sounds weird on the street, but I was out at IBS and I walked by a booth, and a company called Pacific Wood Tech out in the Northwest actually just bought Louisiana Pacific, and they've invented the world's first treated LVL. So now you can take these things out of the home and put them in something like a deck structure and make really big, crazy strong decks with huge sight lines in them where you don't have tons of posts. Sometimes you got to put dozens of posts underneath a relatively small deck that's like 12 feet off the ground. Well, now you can bridge these massive distances using treated LVLs that are like 25-year protected warranty. And they're going to change deck engineering.
It's a game changer, huh?
Yeah, totally. It seems that way to me,
That's pretty exciting.
I think a lot of other carpenters. It is, yeah. And these new things come along every now and then.
Yeah. What did you think of the new Scream movie? There's a change of gears.
In other news, yeah, I personally liked it. And I went with two other people, and I probably had the best review of it. Someone had a terrible one, and there was an in-between review. It felt like a Scream movie to me, and I actually liked Manhattan as a new setting instead of Woodsboro.
That was my first thought was Jason Takes Manhattan.
So me too. And I rewatched it like 2 months before we went to see it. So there's some comparisons to be done there for sure. Yeah, I enjoyed it.
Yeah, that's good. I love Jenna Ortega. Man, she's having a moment, isn't she?
Yeah, she is, man. She's kind of becoming like the hottest thing right now. She's so tiny. You don't realize until you see a movie like this, like everyone talking to her is like towering over her all the time. So it's pretty funny.
Yeah. Did you watch Wednesday?
No, I intended to because I tend to like kind of these dark humor shows and stuff. And I really like the Addams Family as like a franchise overall. I have not seen it yet though. Just the dancing scene.
It's a YA thing, so it's definitely appealing to that audience. But Tim Burton's behind it, and so that kind of piqued my interest a little bit. But I enjoyed it. It was nothing special, but Jenna Ortega is pretty cool to watch.
Yeah, she's leading the scene right now, man. She can go in any direction she wants. But I'm glad that she's sticking to these kind of Scream Queenie things. I hope she like stays a little bit longer in horror before she takes off into like drama and Oscars and stuff like that.
Yeah, I just saw this movie called Spoonful of Sugar. It's out on Shudder.
Ooh. Okay. What's it about?
It's like kind of mommy exploitation thing, kind of like Hand That Rocks the Cradle thing, where like the babysitter comes in and starts taking over. But it was pretty good. Babysitter just is like kind of into LSD, and then she ends up giving that to the kid, and then there's a weird twist at the end. But it was okay. This year hasn't been as good as last year started out on. But there's some good horror movies, but we're still pretty early in the year, I guess.
Yeah, last year was a boom, man. And I think I told you this in Atlanta, but the best thing I've seen pop up recently, I thought, was a movie called Let's Scare Julie.
Oh, right. Yeah, I got to see that.
Fairly low budget, neighborhood horror, creepy house across the street, that sort of thing. Really sinister. Kind of felt like some Harmony Korine movies like Kids, where it's too many unsupervised kids doing things that they shouldn't be doing. So it creates like a high level of stress for adults where you're like, oh my God, you're going to get in so much trouble. But it adds to the appeal of the movie.
Kids can be scary in general.
Terrifying. Yeah.
Ethan, it was great having you on the show again. And I think there's a little bit of optimism for the future of the trades.
I think there is. And I think we might go through a bottom curve, but I think we will start to climb out of it at some point. It just takes a while to change a whole nation or a whole world's mind about something.